Debate and diplomacy have led to many great strides in human history, such examples being the fight for African American and women rights. However, history proves that debate and diplomacy have not always led to success. It also led to many conflicts that had great consequences. Bay of Pigs, Cuba, April 17, 1961. The day started out with peace, however, that was soon to change. 1,500 Cuban exiles out of nowhere stormed the Bay of Pigs on the southwestern coast against the rule of Fidel Castro. These Cuban exiles were not mere ordinary people revolting. They were trained by the CIA and given weapons to overthrow Fidel Castro. Despite being trained by the CIA, the Cuban exiles were quickly crushed by Fidel Castro's forces in a mere 3 days. The main reason why this invasion was a total disaster was due to the plan of the invasion. It was planned that when those 1,500 Cuban exiles landed at the Bay of Pigs beach, they would get Cubans to side with them and help start the revolution towards Fidel Castro. However, a plan is merely a plan. When the Cuban exiles did land, they were surprised that barely any Cubans wanted to revolt towards Fidel Castro. This is due to what was before Fidel Castro's rule over Cuba.
Prior to Fidel Castro coming to power, Cuba was ruled by Fulgencio Batista. Batista was the reason Cuba had a terrible economy. He implemented laws that allowed his fellow government members and himself to profit from giving foreign powers the ability to use Cuban land for commercial needs. The United States was one of these foreign powers that benefited from Batista's system. The United States owned half of the sugar plantations and majority of cattle ranches, mines, and utilities. Due to Batista using a system that essentially benefited foreign power and himself, it caused a large gap between the rich and poor classes of Cuba. As a result, the people of Cuba rioted towards Batista. Batista, in response, heavily censored the people of Cuba's screams for change. He controlled the media, which sadly gave him the ability to silence the riots by ways of execution, violence, and torture. With Cuba in disarray under Batista's rule, a change was bound to arise. Fidel Castro was that change. Fidel Castro was the leader during the Cuban Revolution, lasting from 1953 to 1959, when Castro finally overthrew Fulgencio Batista. Fidel Castro had to set in a new government system to rid of the corrupted system of Batista that plagued Cuba for 8 years. To revive Cuba from the scars of Batista, Castro chose to implement a Marxist-Leninist model, which its purpose is to convert a capitalist state to a socialist state. Thus, under Castro's rule, Cuba became a communist state.
When Fidel Castro came to power in Cuba and implemented communism in Cuba, it brought much attention. This is due to an event currently happening at the time, foreign diplomatics and proxy wars of two opposing government system ideals, democracy and communism. It is known as the Cold War, lasting from 1945 to 1991. The two opposing government systems in the Cold War are supported by two country powerhouses, United States of America and its ideal of democracy, and the former Soviet Union or USSR and its ideal of communism. In April of 1959, prior to choosing to rule Cuba by a communism system, Fidel Castro traveled to the United States, where he met with at the time Vice President Richard Nixon. Nixon tried to convince Castro in the right direction. However, after the meeting, Richard Nixon concluded that Fidel Castro, in his words, either incredibly naive about communism or under communist discipline. I guess is the former. When Fidel Castro did implement communism into Cuba, fear was installed into the United States. This is due to Cuba becoming the first communist country in the Western Hemisphere and was right in the United States' backyard. As a response to defend their idea of government, the US tried many methods to dispose of Fidel Castro, such as assassination attempts. where it's rumored to be about 600 of these assassination attempts towards Fidel Castro, cutting off all trade with Cuba and revolts. The Bay of Pigs invasion was one of these failed revolts.
While we could not be expected to hide our sympathies, we made it repeatedly clear that the armed forces of this country would not intervene in any way. Any unilateral American intervention in the absence of an external attack upon ourselves or an ally would have been contrary to our traditions and to our international obligations. But let the record show that our restraint is not inexhaustible. Should it ever appear that the inter-American doctrine of non-interference merely conceals or excuses a policy of non-action, if the nations of this hemisphere should fail to meet their commitments against outside communist penetration, then I want it clearly understood that this government will not hesitate in meeting its primary obligations, which are to the security of our nation.
After the failed Bay of Pigs invasion, the current president at the time, John F. Kennedy, was looked upon as weak, as he couldn't get rid of Fidel Castro in the United States backyard. After the failed invasion, John F. Kennedy authorized Operation Mongoose on November 30th, 1961. Operation Mongoose was a campaign of terrorist attacks and assassination attempts against Fidel Castro. With these attacks towards Cuba, Fidel Castro felt the need for help. This form of help came from the USSR when they agreed to help Fidel Castro against the United States by supplying arms to Cuba such as tanks, jet fighters, and nuclear missiles to prevent any further invasions. The United States feared that Cuba had nuclear missiles that could reach them. This became known as the Cuban Missile Crisis, which lasted from October 16th to October 28th, 1962. The doomsday clock, which shows the likelihood of a man-made global catastrophe, with midnight representing the end of the world. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, the doomsday clock was 2 minutes away from midnight.
The Bay of Pigs invasion showed the dark side of diplomatic debates, how opposing ideas can lead to dangerous consequences for not one side, but every side, including the neutral one. The Bay of Pigs invasion merely set a domino effect that nearly led to the end of the world through nuclear warfare. Luckily, no nuclear war was fought, but this should be a lesson to be learned for the better future of humanity. People without the knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots. Marc is Garvey.